In the annals of criminal history, there exists a distinct category of offenders who are remembered not for their brilliance, but for their bewildering lack of foresight. While Hollywood movies often portray bank robbers as sophisticated geniuses with elaborate plans and high-tech gadgets, the reality is frequently far more mundane and occasionally laughable. Today, we examine a case that perfectly illustrates the intersection of modern technology and amateur criminal ambition. It is a story that forces us to ask how much preparation is too little, and how a simple internet search can become the smoking gun that unravels an entire scheme. This is the story of two young men who decided to trade their freedom for a fleeting moment of wealth and the digital footprint that led authorities right to their doorstep. The setting for this bizarre tale is the picturesque town of Vail, Colorado, a location world-renowned for its stunning ski slopes and luxury resorts, rather than violent crime. Nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, Vail is a playground for the wealthy and a seasonal home for workers from around the globe who come to service the tourist economy. In the year 2005, the town was bustling with visitors seeking the thrill of the winter season. The atmosphere was one of relaxation and opulence, where the most pressing concern for many was the condition of the fresh powder on the mountains. However, beneath this veneer of alpine tranquility, a plot was being hatched that would soon shatter the peace of this quiet community. Our protagonists, or perhaps antagonists in this narrative, are Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince. Both were 19-year-old citizens of New Zealand who had traveled to the United States to work in a ski shop in Vail. They were typical young men of their age, eager for adventure, and perhaps a bit naive about the consequences of their actions. They lived a modest life, working for hourly wages and serving the affluent tourists who flocked to the resort. Over time, the disparity between their meager earnings and the lavish lifestyles they observed around them began to breed a sense of resentment and entitlement. They craved the wealth they saw every day, but lacked the patience to earn it through legitimate means. As the winter season progressed, Carroll and Prince began to fantasize about a shortcut to riches. Their conversations shifted from mundane work, complaints, to wild hypothetical scenarios of acquiring quick cash. It was during these idle moments that a dangerous idea took root in their minds. They decided that robbing a bank would be the solution to their financial woes. However, neither of them had any experience with crime, let alone a high-stakes felony like bank robbery. They possessed no knowledge of security systems, police response times, or the psychological pressure of holding up a financial institution. Instead of seeking out a seasoned criminal mentor or abandoning the foolish idea entirely, they turned to the only resource they knew well, which was the internet. In a move that would later baffle investigators and amuse the public, the pair sat down at a computer and typed a simple query into the search bar. They searched for the phrase "how to rob a bank," along with other incriminating terms related to weapon procurement and quick getaways. This digital research session was not conducted on a secure, encrypted network or a burner device, but rather on a computer that could easily be linked back to them. They seemingly believed that the sheer volume of information on the World Wide Web would provide them with a foolproof blueprint for the perfect crime. They read articles and perhaps watched videos, believing they were absorbing the wisdom of master criminals, when in reality, they were merely creating a permanent record of their intent. Armed with their newly acquired internet knowledge, the pair moved to the next phase of their plan, which involved gathering supplies. They needed weapons to intimidate the bank staff, but obtaining real firearms proved too difficult or expensive for their limited means. Instead, they purchased realistic-looking BB guns from a local retail store. They believed these toys would be sufficient to command fear and compliance. Along with the fake weapons, they procured masks and dark clothing to conceal their identities. They likely felt a surge of adrenaline as they assembled their kit, convincing themselves that they were transforming into formidable outlaws ready to take on the world. The target they selected was the West Star Bank in Vail. It was a convenient choice, located not far from where they worked and lived. They spent time observing the bank, noting the flow of customers and the number of staff present during different hours. However, their surveillance was amateurish at best. They failed to account for the multiple security cameras positioned both inside and outside the building. They also overlooked the fact that in a small town like Vail, unfamiliar faces, loitering with intent tend to stand out. Their confidence was built on a foundation of ignorance, and their plan was riddled with holes that any experienced detective would have spotted immediately. The day of the robbery arrived, and the weather was characteristically cold and snowy. Carroll and Prince donned their disguises, which consisted of masks that barely covered their distinctive features and bulky winter clothing. They marched towards the West Star Bank with their BB guns hidden from view. As they approached the entrance, their hearts must have been pounding in their chests. This was the point of no return. They were about to cross the line from disgruntled employees to federal bank robbers. They pushed open the doors and stormed into the lobby shouting commands they had likely rehearsed or heard in movies. Inside the bank, the atmosphere instantly shifted from routine business to sheer terror. Customers and tellers froze as the two masked figures waved their weapon and demanded money. The tellers, terrified for their lives, had no way of knowing that the guns pointed at them were merely plastic toys firing small pellets. They followed their training and complied with the demands of the robbers. Carroll and Prince moved with a frantic energy, their movements uncoordinated and chaotic. They shoved cash into their bags, grabbing handfuls of bills without checking for die packs or tracking devices. The adrenaline of the moment likely blinded them to the mistakes they were making in real time. The robbery itself lasted only a few minutes, but to those inside the bank, it must have felt like an eternity. Having secured a substantial amount of cash, the pair turned and fled the scene. They burst out of the bank and ran into the snowy streets of Vail. In their haste, they failed to execute a clean getaway. Instead of a waiting vehicle, with a driver ready to speed away, they relied on their own feet and the confusion of the moment. They ran towards a nearby residential area, hoping to disappear into the landscape. However, their path took them past several witnesses who noted their descriptions and the direction of their flight. Back at the bank, the silent alarm had already been triggered, and the local police were en route. The response was swift and coordinated. Law enforcement officers secured the scene and began taking statements from the shaken witnesses. The description of the suspects was somewhat generic due to the masks, but witnesses noted their height and build. Crucially, the bank's security cameras had captured the entire incident in high resolution. Detectives gathered around the monitors, watching the footage of the two young men waving their BB guns. Even at this early stage, the investigators sensed something unusual about the perpetrators. Their body language suggested they were young and inexperienced. As the investigation launched, the police began to canvass the surrounding area. They looked for discarded clothing weapons or any other evidence the fleeing robbers might have left behind. It did not take long for clues to emerge. In a nearby dumpster, officers found some of the clothing worn during the heist, along with the BB guns. This was a critical error by Carroll and Prince. By discarding the items so close to the crime scene, they provided the police with physical evidence that could be tested for DNA and fingerprints. It was the first of many dominoes that would fall in rapid succession. Meanwhile, Carroll and Prince had made their way back to their accommodation. They were now in possession of approximately $130,000 in cash. The sight of such a large sum of money likely induced a state of euphoria. They began to take photos of themselves, holding the stacks of bills posing like rap stars or movie villains. These photographs were not just for personal memories, they were digital trophies of their conquest. In their arrogance, they failed to realize that these images were yet another piece of incriminating evidence that would eventually be used against them in a court of law. The police investigation quickly pivoted to identifying the suspects. Given the small nature of the community and the fact that the robbers had fled on foot, detectives surmised that the perpetrators were likely locals or seasonal workers living nearby. They began running background checks on young men in the area who fit the physical description. The Federal Bureau of Investigation joined the case, bringing their resources and expertise to the table. The pressure was mounting, and the net was tightening around the two young New Zealanders, who were likely already planning their departure from Colorado. Carroll and Prince decided that they needed to leave Vail as soon as possible. They purchased one-way tickets to Mexico, planning to live out their days on a warm beach, enjoying their stolen fortune. However, their travel arrangements were just as poorly planned as the robbery itself. They booked their flights from the Denver International Airport using their real names. They did not use fake identifications or attempt to conceal their travel plans. It was as if they believed that once they left the bank, the crime was effectively erased, and they were free to resume their lives as ordinary travelers. The breakthrough in the case came swiftly. A tip from the community, or perhaps a connection made by a sharp-eyed detective, led the authorities to focus on the two ski shop employees who had been acting suspiciously. When investigators looked into their recent activities, they discovered the flight bookings to Mexico. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Two young men with limited income, suddenly buying international tickets immediately after a bank robbery, raised massive red flags. The authorities coordinated with airport security to intercept the suspects before they could board their plane. At Denver International Airport, Carroll and Prince were waiting for their flight, likely feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement. They were moments away from escaping the country, but their freedom was about to come to an abrupt end. Federal agents and police officers approached them in the terminal. The pair was taken into custody without incident. When officers searched their luggage, they found a significant portion of the stolen cash bundled up in their bags. The physical evidence was undeniable. They had been caught red-handed with the proceeds of the crime. Following the arrest, investigators seized the personal effects of the two men, including their computer and cameras. This is where the true extent of their incompetence was revealed. Forensic analysts accessed the browser history on their computer and found the search query "how to rob a bank." It was a moment that likely caused seasoned investigators to shake their heads in disbelief. The digital trail was so clear and direct that it almost seemed like a prank. The search history also included inquiries about the specific bank and calculations about how much money they might get. The camera found in their possession contained the incriminating photos of the pair posing with the money. These images showed their faces clearly alongside the stolen cash. It was the equivalent of a signed confession. The prosecution now had video footage of the robbery, physical evidence of the weapons, and clothing the stolen money found in their possession, and digital photos of them celebrating the crime. The case against Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince was watertight. There was no room for denial or alibis. Their own vanity and reliance on technology had sealed their fate. During the interrogation, the two men reportedly confessed to the crime. They realized that the game was over. The reality of their situation began to sink in. They were not master criminals, destined for a life of luxury in Mexico. They were young men facing serious federal charges in a foreign country. The mandatory sentences for armed bank robbery in the United States are severe, and they were looking at spending a significant portion of their youth behind bars. The dream of easy wealth had turned into a nightmare of legal proceedings and prison cells. The media frenzy surrounding the case was intense. The headline of the bank robbers who Googled their crime went viral around the world. It was a story that resonated because of its absurdity. People everywhere laughed at the sheer foolishness of the plan. Carroll and Prince became the poster boys for the dumb criminal archetype. Late-night comedians made jokes about them, and internet forums buzzed with discussions about their incompetence. The serious nature of the crime was almost overshadowed by the comedic elements of their preparation and capture. However, for the victims inside the bank, the experience was anything but funny. The tellers and customers had faced what they believed were lethal weapons. The trauma of being held at gunpoint does not vanish simply because the guns turned out to be fake or the robbers turned out to be incompetent. The judge and the prosecution emphasized this point during the legal proceedings. The fear inflicted on the community was real, and the punishment needed to reflect the severity of the act regardless of how poorly it was executed. In court, the defense likely tried to portray Carroll and Prince as misguided youths who had made a terrible mistake rather than hardened criminals. They highlighted their lack of criminal history and their cooperation after arrest. However, the federal justice system is unforgiving when it comes to bank robbery. The premeditation evidenced by the Google searches and the purchase of disguises worked against them. It showed that this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but a planned event even if the planning was deeply flawed. Ultimately, Luke Carroll and Anthony Prince were sentenced to prison. They received sentences that would keep them incarcerated for several years. The judge handed down the punishment, serving as a warning to others who might consider similar paths. The two friends were separated and sent to federal correctional facilities to serve their time. Their ski trip to Colorado had ended in the most disastrous way possible. Instead of returning to New Zealand with stories of the slopes, they returned with criminal records and a cautionary tale. The case of the Google bank robbers left a lasting legacy in the world of cybercrime and forensics. It served as a stark example of how digital forensics had become a standard part of criminal investigations. It highlighted that every keystroke, every search, and every digital photo creates a permanent record that can be recovered. Criminals could no longer operate in the shadows if they were leaving digital footprints in the light. The internet, which they thought was a tool for anonymity, was actually a tool for transparency. For the town of Vail, the robbery was a shock, but life quickly returned to normal. The snow continued to fall, the tourists continued to arrive, and the West Star Bank continued its operations. The story of Carroll and Prince became a local legend, a tale told by bartenders and ski instructors to new arrivals. It became a part of the town folklore, a reminder that even in paradise, desperation and stupidity can lead to crime. The physical scars of the event healed, but the memory of the two bumbling robbers remained. As we reflect on this story, we are struck by the hubris of the perpetrators. They believed that watching a screen could replace real-world experience. They believed that the internet held the secrets to bypassing the rules of society. It is a uniquely modern delusion. We live in an age where information is instantly accessible, and it is easy to mistake information for wisdom. Carroll and Prince had information, but they lacked the wisdom to understand the consequences of using it. The story also serves as a commentary on the allure of instant gratification. The two young men were willing to risk everything for a shortcut. They did not want to put in the years of work required to build wealth. They wanted the prize without the effort. This desire is a fundamental human flaw, but when combined with the enabling power of the internet, it can lead to disastrous results. They saw the end goal, but were blind to the treacherous path they chose to walk. In the years since their release, Carroll and Prince have returned to obscurity. One can only hope that they used their time in prison to reflect on their actions and learn the lessons that Google could not teach them. Their names will likely always be associated with this botched crime, a permanent tag in the search results they once relied upon. They sought fame and fortune, but achieved only infamy and death. It is a tragic waste of potential for two young men who had their whole lives ahead of them. So the next time you find yourself typing a question into a search bar, remember the story of the Vail bank robbers. Remember that the digital world is a mirror that reflects our intentions back at us. Whether we are searching for a recipe or a get-rich-quick scheme, we are leaving a trail. And for those who might be tempted to walk on the wrong side of the law, remember that the most important lesson is one you won't find in a search result. True success is earned, not stolen, and no amount of browsing history can teach you how to escape the consequences of your own actions.